Hello and welcome to the dungeon. I'm your host Rob. Today we're going to be taking a look at a couple of monk multi-class builds. I recently had a subscriber ask for more monk stuff, and I realized I've only done one monk multi-classing video, and that was with Rogue. And yeah, monk probably deserves a little bit more love. And I think the monk has some interesting potential because anytime you have a class that has a unique or mostly unique mechanic, there's some good possibilities for abusing that mechanic when we combine it with other classes that were never meant to have that ability. You know, look at the Warlock Paladin or Sorcerer Paladin, you start adding heavy armor to spellcasting classes that weren't supposed to have it, while giving the Paladin things like, say, Quicken Casting and Twin Spells, or giving them smites that come back on a short rest and a bunch of invocations, and you can get some pretty nasty combinations there, right? And I think the monk with the key abilities and just that pool of abilities that you can use kind of gives us some similar opportunities. And, I think that's definitely worth looking at. I do want to say that there's probably a lot of ways you could do these kind of builds, but because I haven't given the monk itself a lot of attention so far, I'm going to keep both these multi-class ideas to be more monk-centric. One of the classes we're going to be looking at combining with is Cleric, and I think that you could easily make a Cleric that took 5 levels of monk, for example, right? Let's say you wanted to get extra attack on your Cleric, and you thought, you know what, I don't really feel like going fighter on this character, I'm going to go monk and get extra attack that way. I think that's perfectly viable, but that's more of a Cleric build, and we're going to try to keep this video more monk-centric. I also want to point out, before we get into anything else, that when you multi-class your monk, you might choose to wear armor, and that does have various severe ramifications on your monk. You could lose a lot of your different monk abilities, and maybe that's worth it to you, right? Maybe you'd rather just have a really good armor class, because monks do tend to have kind of crappy defenses at low levels. Once you start getting, uncanny dodge and evasion, and you get deflect missile and that kind of stuff, you start getting a lot more robust as a monk. But especially at early levels, you're a lot squishier than a lot of other, more martial focused classes, right? So, maybe you don't mind that. But here's a quick list of the things you get to keep wearing heavy armor, or any armor, sorry, not using unarmored defense anyway. And here's what you lose, right? So you get to keep all your key abilities, which includes your flurry of blows and your deflect missiles and a lot of other good stuff. You get to keep all your subclass features, so that's good as well. And you get to keep stunning strike. That's a decent list, right? So maybe you don't care. But here's what you lose, though. You lose your scaling damage dice from your monk weapons. You lose the extra movement speed. You lose the ability to use your dexterity bonuses with your unarmed strikes. And you lose your regular bonus action unarmed strike that monks can be potentially making. So you can still use a flurry of blows to make 2 bonus action attacks. You lose the one that you just naturally get as a monk. And that's a lot to give up. So for the purposes of this video, we're not going to be looking at, wearing armor other than just using our unarmored defense abilities, right? I also want to mention, in general, monks defensively at low levels tend to be kind of poor. And maybe you wanted to play Kensai and use a longbow, for example, and take that as one of your Kensai weapons. That's not a big deal, and that's a perfectly viable build. I think that you'll be fine that way, right? Nothing wrong with that at all. And you could even take, say, something like Ranger, add in the archery fighting style, get a couple of nice Ranger abilities, and I think you're going to be pretty good, honestly. So I think that has a lot of potential. Maybe even grab the sharpshooter feat at some point. Solid character right there. But let's say you wanted to be more of a melee-focused monk. The thing is, monks aren't really meant to be these front-line fighters, like a fighter or a paladin or a barbarian. You have a D8 hit points, they have a D10 or even a D12 for the barbarian. You have probably, let's assume that you start with 16 dexterity, and we'll assume that you started with either 14 or 16 dex, somewhere in that range, right? So you've got a 15 or 16 armor class at level 1. But the party's fighter started with chainmail and a shield. So he's got already at level 1 18 armor class. In fact, he might have taken the defensive fighting style. He could have a 19 armor class at level 1. And it's not like this is some crazy, unusual, like, oh, nobody ever thought of combining chainmail with a shield. You know, like you start with both of those. That's pretty obvious. You could be doing that. Yeah, maybe you went two-handed weapons on that fighter, but we're assuming right now on the defensive side that he probably didn't. And like I said, he might have gone defensive fighting style. He could be looking at 19 armor class, and you had a 15 or a 16. And the Paladin's not far behind him, right? In fact, the Paladin could take defensive fighting style level 2 and be right there with him, right? So you have a D8 hit points and worse armor class. Now, like I said, once you start getting the monk defensive abilities, your uncanny dodge, your evasion, your deflect missiles, all that kind of stuff, you start becoming a lot tougher. And so it's not really as much of a big deal. You start getting some ability score increases under your belt. You're able to boost your dex. You're able to maybe even boost your wisdom at some point. And it kind of corrects itself given enough time, right? But at the beginning, you're just not as robust as some of these other characters. The other thing that's worth noting on monks is that unlike certain classes, like say like a paladin dropping a bunch of smite dice, or a rogue using all their sneak attack, they tend to hit really hard on like one given attack. The monk doesn't really do that. Relatively speaking, the monk does a lot less damage per hit, but they make up for it by hitting in bulk, right? By level 5, you're making 2 attacks regularly, 1 unarmed attack regularly, and if you spend key points, 2 bonus action attacks instead. So by level 5, you can be attacking 4 times around with pretty decent consistency. So while you lack the big burst damage on any one given attack, you just make up for it by hitting in bulk. You're like the Costco of attacking. And anytime you have a lot of these bulk attacks like that, finding little ways to boost the damage you do per hit starts to add up very, very quickly and can give us a nice damage boost overall. So these are the 2 main things we're looking at from our multiclassing video today, is boosting our defense in different ways and boosting our offense in different ways, while mostly still trying to maintain these like monkly traditions, essentially, right? So the first of these is we're going to take a look at Ranger. And the second one is going to be Cleric. And I want to say, before we get into either one too, another interesting tidbit with Monk is because we're going to have a decent wisdom probably for our unarmored defense, right? And we do have a few subclass abilities that occasionally use wisdom as well, right? We want to have a decent wisdom, but we're not casting anything with that wisdom, right? We're not concentrating on anything at all, right? Ever. So why not add a bit of wisdom casting to the monk? We've already got a good wisdom, and other than boosting our armor class, it's really not doing a lot. Let's find ways to do something with it. So I kind of like the idea of adding in Ranger or Cleric. I think the Druid can work as well, but because shape changing, wild shape stuff and unarmored stuff, there's a lot of conflicts between them. I think that it's still worth looking at, but it's kind of going to need its own video. Otherwise, half the video is just going to be looking at that stuff. So I think I will do a video on that in the future, but I kind of want to give it its own attention, right? And then these two are both kind of doing similar things, just in different ways, right? So I think they make a better video together. I'm also looking to probably take 4 levels of these other classes or less. And the reason is because 4 levels is still going to give me my full complement of ASIs, right? I kind of consider 5 ASIs to be the baseline. Obviously, your rogues and your fighters have more. But if you play any class from 1 to 20, you get 5. Problem is, with multi-classing, a lot of times, you might not get 5. You might only have 4. You might even have 3, depending, you know? I mean, maybe you took 1 level of every class in the game, and then a 2nd level of every class, and you don't have any ASIs. That could happen. I don't know why you would do that, but other than to be hilarious, though, and to troll your party members. So there is some potential there, but, you know, you shouldn't do that. Or should you? But anyways, so 4 levels or less is probably what I'm looking at. And in the Ranger case, going 5 levels would give me Pass Without Trace, which I would kind of like, but it's also going to give me the extra attack feature, which doesn't stack with the monk extra attack. And because I want this to be more of a monk focused video, I don't think that going beyond 5 levels of ranger really gives us a lot either. Most of the good stuff is going to be level 2, where we can get a fighting style, level 3, where we get our archetype abilities, and level 4, where we can get the ASI. If we even want the ASI. We might not. We might just think, yeah, we're going to max dex, we're going to maybe take a feat, and we're going to leave our wisdom at 16 for our whole career. That can be fine too, right? Nothing wrong with that. Maybe we take a couple feats and just leave wisdom. That's fine. But especially if we wanted to go with a bow ranger, and like I said, I think Kensai combined with any of the ranger subclasses has some really nice potential there, right? That could be really, really good. And then you just take, like I said, you take the bow as one of your Kensai monk weapons. You take the archery fighting style. You maybe grab sharpshooters, your feet, and really you're pretty set. That's pretty good. I also, though, think that a lot of monks don't want to be using a bow. Like when I think of monk, I think of like a more hand-to-hand, literally hand-to-hand fighting class, right? And so along those veins, let's take a look at what a ranger could be giving us if we wanted to go that style, right? Number 1 is the duelist fighting style. This is going to give us a +2 damage to our weapon attacks. So it's not going to apply to that unarmed strike or to our flurry of blows, but an extra 2 damage on each of those weapon attacks isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just going to help to boost that damage a little bit more, and that is what we're here for, right? 3 is going to give us a subclass features, and there's a bunch of ranger subclasses that I'm probably not looking at all. And that's because a lot of them use their bonus action to do extra damage on like one of your hits per turn. And the extra damage would be nice, but it's using a bonus action, and we already have our unarmed strikes or our flurry of blows competing for that bonus action. And we might be wanting Hunter's Mark, which is also going to be competing for that bonus action. So we have so much going on with our bonus action, I don't want to be reliant on that for damage. But there are some good alternatives still. The Fey Wanderer, I mentioned in a recent video, you just infuse your weapon with psychic damage, and 1 hit per turn, you get to do an extra d4 damage. I mean, eventually it goes to d6, but we're not taking enough levels of ranger for that to matter. So we're going to keep it to 1d4, right? And it's only 1d4, but that's every round. And imagine if you took the duelist fighting style, and now you're doing, let's say you have enough levels to have, say you're like level 10-ish overall, right? So you've got your extra attack from monk, you've got your 3 or 4 or 5 levels of ranger, whatever it was, 3 or 4 levels of ranger, right? You're doing that extra 2 damage per every weapon strike because of duelist. You're doing an extra 2.5 damage on average with your infused weapon. You've got your unarmed strikes doing a bit more damage. And suddenly you're starting to add up. That's an extra like 6.5 damage per round just from 2 of your duelist strikes and your weapon infusion, right? Another option is to go Hunter and take Colossus Slayer. And I think that's a nice damage boost as well. There are some limitations. The creature already has to be wounded, but your allies could have wounded it, or you could just do that on a subsequent hit, right? Let's say you have 2 attacks around again. You hit it the first time, you hit it the second time, you use Colossus Slayer on the second one. Even if the second one missed, you unarmed strike him, use Colossus Slayer on that, maybe, whatever, right? I think there's some potential there. And then, of course, there's always, and I hate to even say it because I talk about this one all the time, the Gloom Stalker. You get an extra attack in the opening round of combat, and that attack does an extra d8 of damage as well. And I think that the Gloom Stalker really shines in shorter fights. I think the other ones in a more, like if you're having a lot of 1, 2, 3 round fights, Gloom Stalker is going to be the best choice here. But if you tend to have a lot of 6, 7, 8 round combats, then the other classes are going to start to close that gap over time and make up for it. So really that's kind of up to you which one you want to go with. I think they're all pretty decent. We're not going deep enough into Ranger in any of them to, for it to be a game changer. But, I think it's worth mentioning. We're looking at, 3 or 4 levels probably. And, that's pretty good. We're also using Hunter's Mark. And I know some of you are thinking, but you already just said that Hunter's Mark is going to conflict with all of our monk attacks for our bonus action. And sadly, that is kind of true. But I also think that there's still a lot of potential here. We're probably not going to use it as much in a lot of horde fights, right? That's one thing about Ranger, is that Hunter's Mark is just kind of this all-purpose damage booster set. Sorry about that. Yeah, so usually Hunter's Mark is kind of like an all-purpose damage boost for Rangers, and you're just moving it around and boosting your damage. In the Monk's case, we're probably not going to use it for a lot of these like horde type of battles, right? If you're fighting a bunch of weak creatures, it's probably not going to be your best use. But for like a boss encounter, I think Hunter's Mark still has a lot of value, because in a longer fight, you can apply that Hunter's Mark in the opening round, get in a couple attacks, apply that Hunter's Mark damage, and yeah, you're not going to get your bonus action or 2 bonus action attacks potentially, but in all the subsequent rounds going forward though, you've got that Hunter's Mark just boosting your damage. And if you're using like a flurry of blows, for example, you can be attacking 4 times a round and applying that Hunter's Mark damage 4 times per round, and just doing that until you run out of key points essentially, right? And so the potential damage there in those kind of fights is still really, really good. Probably not going to be using it all the time like you would on a Ranger potentially, but I think there's still some really solid potential there. So that's the Ranger. The other combination I want to look at is Cleric, and specifically War Cleric. Now War Cleric has a few issues as well, but overall I still think it's pretty good. And one thing I like about War Cleric is that we could just take 1 level of War Cleric, honestly. Now, usually if I say 1 level of War Cleric, it's because I'm looking to add heavy armor to somebody who didn't have heavy armor. That's not what we're trying to do with the Monk. We're not going to really use the heavy armor. We're also potentially going to make an extra attack every round as a bonus action attack, a number of times equal to our Wisdom modifier. We already kind of had that with the Monk, so again, that ability is not getting a lot of value, although I will mention a specific time when we might want to consider it, because I think it can be useful there. The main reason I want War Cleric is because we have Divine Favor on our domain spell list. And it's usually a paladin spell, gives you D4 radiant damage to all your weapon attacks. And yes, it's only going to be the weapon attacks, it's not going to apply to unarmed strikes, but still pretty decent though. And that can be a pretty nice offensive boost as well. And the reason I kind of like it is because unlike the Hunter's Mark, we're not going to be able to transfer it around, right? Once it's on our weapon, it's just there for all those attacks. And it can be a nice little damage boost. And yeah, it's only a D4 compared to a D6, but I mean, that's an average of 2.5 damage per hit instead of 3.5 damage. There's a difference. I'm not saying it's nothing, but it's only a 1 level dip, and it's not really going to delay our Monk stuff much. And then if we wanted to go more levels of War Cleric, we still can, right? 2nd level is going to give us that +10 to a hit with our Channel Divinity. 3rd level is going to give us 2nd level spells. And like I said, usually I might be excited about having a spiritual weapon or something here, but we've already got so much going on with the bonus action that's not really going to matter at all. 4th level is still going to give us our ability score increase. And then like I mentioned earlier in the video, you could take way more levels of Cleric, right? Maybe Monk was just your way of getting extra attack. That's fine too, but that's not the focus here. But I do like the idea of using Divine Favor to help boosting that offense a little bit. And like I said, it's not a big commitment. The other thing is that if we have Divine Favor going, then using that War Cleric ability to make an extra weapon attack as a bonus action starts to make a little more sense, because it gives us another opportunity to apply that weapon damage from our Divine Favor a 3rd time in a round. And if you're just going to use it to make an unarmed strike anyway, not flurry of blows, then you're like, yeah, okay, I can just use my weapon instead. And that's going to be even more damage. And I think it's pretty good there. For an ability that's not costing us, spell slots, not really costing us anything, we just got it for free, essentially, because we wanted Divine Favor. The other nice thing about it is that we get Shield of Faith on our domain list. Now, that doesn't really matter, because we could have just cast Shield of Faith anyways, of course, right? But it means we don't have to have it prepared, which is nice. And that can kind of help to boost that armor class problem that we talked about earlier in this video as well. The Monk doesn't tend to have as good of an armor class. And Shield of Faith, since we don't have much to concentrate on except for maybe Divine Favor, but if we wanted more defense, Shield of Faith is a nice alternative to that. And the ability to have a heal type of spell or even a healing word to be able to add in like a bless spell or something like that to our repertoire. These things aren't necessarily going to be like my go-to move with this, but the fact that they're there and that I have the option of some of these other abilities is pretty nice. You know, maybe somebody crit the paladin twice in one round suddenly, and now the paladin's down, and now suddenly you are the front line. You know, being able to be like, okay, I'm going to make my attacks, but instead of using my bonus action to attack with, again, I'm going to cast a healing word on the paladin, and we'll get the paladin back up in the fight. And now the paladin's up, maybe he or she can lay hands themselves, and now they'll be, you know, perfectly okay again, and the fight we can reset the fight essentially, right? Having those kind of options on a class that doesn't normally have that option is pretty worthwhile, in my opinion. So I kind of like the fact that we can add some of that to it. Overall, I really kind of like just the idea of one, maybe even two levels of War Cleric. It's not going to slow down the monk progression very much at all. And I feel that it's still adding a decent amount to our kit. So anyways, that's what I really want to talk about in this video. I think that the monk has some really fun and interesting mechanics. I think that it has a very unique and interesting play style as well. And I think that monk has some really nice potential as like a lockdown or anti-caster specialist. It's really surprised me in my current campaign that I'm running. We have a monk in that party, and in a couple fights in a row now, basically he was like the anti-caster. He's like the caster killer for the party. And it's just because he's so fast and has so much mobility. So the one example wasn't really a great example. It was just him going after the caster and hitting the guy with a stunning strike and shutting the guy down until everybody else was dead and the party could help him kill this guy instead of stunning striking the guy multiple times, right? But the other example, they were fighting a bunch of Fey creatures, and including a bunch of like elf types, right? And the one caster, she ended up hitting the party with an Evard's Black Tentacles. And the monk was the only guy not in the area effect because he was fighting somebody else. Everybody else got hit. Everybody failed their saving throw. So now they're all restrained and they're taking damage. And then the monk, because he rolled like a 1 or a 2 on his initiative and was, you know, almost dead last, even though he has great dexterity, the next round, they all get their saving throws again. They all fail again, and they're taking even more damage. And suddenly the fight is looking really, really bad. Like things had been going okay, and now it's definitely taking a turn for the worse. And then we finally get to the monk. And the monk decides, I'm going to use my incredible movement speed to basically run across the battlefield. I'll eat an attack of opportunity from this guy. Oh, he missed? Good. I'm going to run through the Evard's Black Tentacles, using my dexterity to hopefully make the saving throw, and then try to stunning strike the caster. Which he did. He passed the saving throw, doesn't get restrained, hits the caster, stunning strikes her, she fails her saving throw, becomes stunned, and the Evard's Black Tentacles go down. And suddenly the whole party's free, and the fight starts turning the party's momentum again. And I don't think she even got another spell off ever. I think she tried to cast something again at one point, but somebody was able to counterspell her at that point. Because she'd counterspelled their earlier counterspell attempt. She cast something, they tried to counterspell her. She used her reaction to counterspell. And all of a sudden, you know, they're in trouble kind of thing. And he just basically changed the course of the battle just with the combination of his mobility, his ability to trust in the dice to help him overcome the dexterity saving throw, and then the stunning strike. And like I said, it completely changed the momentum of the fight. So I do think that there's a lot of potential for stuff like that, and I think Monk's just kind of a fun class in general. Anyways, I wanted to make a brief mention about feats. I haven't been talking about feats much lately, but I think on the Monk, the mobile feat is quite nice, and the fact that you can use it to like just dart around the battlefield and be this really even more mobile skirmisher than Monks already are, I really like quite a bit. I kind of like things like even like a sentinel or something on a monk, and just using that as a form of locking down different targets on different people. And you know, if somebody's on one of your casters, the monk can just run over there and he attack the caster again. Oh, I hit him with my opportunity attack with sentinel. Now he's locked in place and the caster can get away, you know? And the fact that you have so much mobility is really nice. Of course, the lucky feat is always great. You know, if you decide to take a chance and run through Evard's Black Tentacles on the off chance that maybe you can hit the enemy caster and stunning strike them, and then you roll a 1 on your saving throw, having lucky could completely change the results of your combat. So I like that feat quite a bit as well. But honestly, there's a lot of good choices on Monk, and I think that I think that adding a bit more defense and a bit more damage and finding ways to sort of work around those issues for the Monk can make for a really, really fun and rewarding multi-class. And it's one we haven't looked at yet. It's a class that we haven't given a lot of attention to yet. And I think it kind of deserves a little more love than I've been giving it. So anyways, those are my thoughts. And that's our video. Please feel free to like, subscribe, you know, all the YouTube stuff. And most importantly, leave me your comments in the comment section. I look forward to reading them. Thank you very much, and I will see you next time.